Assalamu alaikum, peace be upon you. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, as-salatu was-salamu ala Rasulullah. If you give a toy to a child or he finds one himself, he or she will claim ownership of it. And if you try to take it away from them, they will defend the right of its ownership and likely scream, cry, and ask for help of others. This feeling of ownership and defense of it exists in the world of animals as well. Any animal who builds a nest or a home or finds a prey, food, etc., will consider its ownership and defend it if threatened or to be taken away from them. And of course, other animals may even come to its aid. You have probably seen, for example, how crows gather and scream defending their nest, or bees defending their hives and their queen bee. Human ownership in early days was similar to that of animals, limited to the need, place, and time. Both animals and early humans kept limited possession of things in terms of quantity and time, and then perhaps let go after their needs had been satisfied. Animals still do this. However, human ownership has evolved since then. The early humans were hunters and gatherers, and as such, they gathered their food and hunting instruments in their huts or caves. And when their needs were met, or when they migrated, they took what they could and left everything else, including their homes, for others to use. The concept of ownership, which has a fixed root, has evolved for humans from perspective of quality and quantity based on conditions, historic events, types, and usage. For example, in some societies, the movable and immovable items are public property, whereas in another society, the same items may be considered private property. While the evolution of ownership and its advancements and the economic matters have come a long way, and in some ways have made life easier and impacted man's thoughts, on the other hand, have added many challenges and caused problems which thinkers and scholars have continuously tried to find solutions for. However, none has come up with a decisive solution. Some even think there is no solution and that man must always keep his guard against its ill effects. The root cause starts with when man surrenders his will and attention to any and all of his own whims and desires. Then, fulfilling only what he needs no longer exists. His limited need for limited time becomes unlimited and cannot be stopped, because he is a free being with free will, and he will try to increase his circle of influence, possession, and affluence. Over the course of history, the more wealth and ownership have become important, the means to pay more attention to them have been developed and advanced to the point it has become so significant, has become such a superpower that has overcome and influenced other powers, such as moral, spiritual powers, and even political powers. As discussed, in the old days, life was far simpler. The love of ownership belonged to very limited items, which were exclusively limited to the need and time. Hence, from both quality and quantity perspectives, the concept of ownership was simple and limited. A person would consider himself the owner of a tree, a place, or an instrument to the extent his needs were met by them. The moment he migrated somewhere else or stopped using them, someone else could claim ownership and start using them. After the individual or family living became tribal or societal, the power to possess and the scope of ownership was extended until it reached the point of production, distribution, and consumer market, which resulted in centers of power and ownership. From then on, the ownership changed from strictly need-based ownership to the ownership beyond, which brought with it moral illnesses such as greed, stinginess, jealousy, competition, animosity, and so on and so forth. In any society, when the economic condition and ownership go off balance with looming danger of destruction and chaos, usually those with foresight and opinion within the society will try to find solutions. Their aim is to save the society by appealing to people's feelings and humanity for goodwill, by giving sincere advice and sounding alarms for those in power and ownership to fulfill their social obligations through offered solutions in order to prevent economic disasters. However, because such sincere opinions or advice are not rooted from a faith-based or ideologically sound source, they either do not last or have no effect at all, because such solutions are not designed to combat rebellion of instinctive will and desire for love of accumulating and increasing wealth. Many of these pundits do not pay attention to the fact that social and economic conditions are a direct result of behavior and conduct of individuals as well as various circles within the society, and such actions and attitudes stem from such individuals' moral and ethical values, and one cannot dismiss the inner construct of a person, what goes on inside him, from what appears of him or her outside. As such, any law or opinion that is not based on man's inner being and moral ethical values will not have firm standing and will not last. After all, is it not the case that any proposal, opinion, or plan must eventually be approved and executed by those in power and in charge of legislation? Well, if they themselves are not ethical, without moral character and faith-based compass, then how could they lead their society towards successful solution? In fact, in many cases, these executives and leaders themselves are immersed in accumulating and increasing their personal wealth. It is for this reason that historically, in the past, we have seen societies and nations who are deeply rooted in divine faith have done better in this regard as part of their faith directives of feeling responsible and obligated to their communities. Hence, they did not have as many social classes as we have today, especially in the Western secular world. Human and natural resources were not exploited in such societies as we have today and yesterday due to Western colonialism. There's much to be said about wealth and ownership history, from what we just discussed to Plato's proposal for social justice laid out in his book called Republic of Plato, to later centuries, Thomas More and Thomas Campanella in 1500s, to Adam Smith and Malthus in 1700, up to Industrial Revolution in the 1800s. In parallel to this history, there were also divine faiths that came and preached justice, equality, and benevolence among people and conveyed divine instructions from the Holy Scriptures like Torah, Gospel, and finally the Quran as the last divine revelation. Instructions that brought hope and relief to those who were oppressed and exploited. With the above background, we begin with Islamic and the Quranic perspective that started 14 centuries ago. Islam firstly defines the fundamental and general goals for individuals as well as the society and their connection, followed by maxims and rulings based on these goals. These goals differ with each other based on the individual, society, material, spiritual, and social nature. What we aim to discuss here is the ownership and its social connections according to the Quran and Sunnah. In Islam, the tenet of ownership is relative and limited because man's power and freedom is limited. Hence, man cannot be the absolute owner and operate completely free as he wills. In Islam, the absolute sovereignty belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who is the creator and sustainer of all things. As such, he is the ultimate owner and in absolute control of everything. Therefore, human ownership is limited to his wise free will, using his aql, intellect, which is also given to him but by God Almighty. قل اللهم مالك الملك تؤتي الملك من تشاء وتنزع الملك ممن تشاء. Say, O Allah, owner of the kingdom, you give the ownership to whom you will, according to your wisdom, and take it away from whom you will. Which tells the believer to keep vigilant as to who is in charge of the universe man is part of and who is the true owner of it. Or we have هو الذي جعلكم خلائف في الأرض. It is he who made you stewards on earth. Or وآتوهم من مال الله الذي آتاكم. And give them from the wealth of Allah that he has given you. Or وَأَرْضُ اللَّهِ وَاسِعَةٌ. Allah's earth is spacious. And many more that say Allah is the absolute owner of everything, including the land and earth's resources we utilize and supposed to be custodian of. This means mankind is not the absolute owner of the earth and its resources, so he can do whatever he wants to do with it. What belongs to Allah Azza wa Jal belongs to him. And mankind is only the steward and servant of his. In other words, because his stewardship, khilafah, is for all mankind, as individuals and custodians, its use must be limited and to benefit the public. It is through this maxim that the ownership of mankind is limited, conditional, and borrowed, where the following ownership ideals and connections are developed, as we mentioned a few in a very high level. Number one, as a general rule, the earth and its resources are not exclusive property of anyone, not for an individual nor the society. However, the community leaders are tasked to supervise and utilize the resources for the best interest of the society. As such, private ownership of various types of wealth is a special case or under special conditions. Number two, individuals' possession of land or what's on it is limited to its beneficial use for the individual and the society. For example, from Islamic perspective, the societal benefit takes precedent and priority over individual benefit. As such, lands are divided into two groups: developed, hence possessed by individuals or the public, and undeveloped, in which nothing has been done to it, as in most of uninhabited land on earth, forests, mountains, rivers, etc., none of which belong to neither individuals nor governments. In such lands, no possession in terms of buy, sell, or transfer is allowed. However, if one takes such a land for the purpose of developing it, for example, by planting trees, digging a well, etc., he can then have conditional possession of it. Number 3, in Islam, someone sitting on the wealth, hoarding the wealth, and not circulating it in the society is not allowed. Number 4, Islamic fiqh, jurisprudence, has definitions and rulings on ownership. Number 5, natural resources must not be in possession of or will of any individual or special class, and none can restrict the public from its use and benefit. Number 6, money and precious metals, which are used to buy and sell goods, must not be accumulated, hoarded, and concentrated by certain individuals as a treasure or depository, so they can gain power over others and manipulate people for their own gains. Number 7, the weak-minded does not possess or manage wealth. These were just a few examples of ownership ideals in Islam, which are unlike the other two ideals, which are at two opposite extremes. That is, Islamic methodology is different than that of capitalism, which is freedom in unlimited absolute ownership, and socialism, which is denying or limiting individual ownership and absolute opposition to capitalism, both of which are products of fast and abrupt industrial revolution and have their own problems, neither of which can coexist. That is, if one is adopted, the other must be rejected. And the society that chooses one must submit to everything that either one offers. Either total freedom in ownership offered by capitalism, whose effects are exploitation, injustice, concentration of wealth by the special few, and promotion of huge investors holding all the capital and exclusion of labor class. Or the other system of socialism, which excludes any individual ownership, which limits individual freedom and independence, forced by a small oppressive ruling party. Islam offers a system which is neither nor, powered by divine faith, which goes beyond man-made theories and ideas, one that considers man's best interest in this life and the next, while holding individuals responsible for themselves and for what happens to their societies. One has no right to take others' rights of ownership, as the Quran says, وَلَا تَأْكُلُوا أَمْوَالَكُمْ بَيْنَكُمْ بِالْبَاطِلِ وَتَدْلُوا بِهَا إِلَى الْحُكَّامِ لِتَأْكُلُوا فَرِيقًا مِنْ أَمْوَالِ النَّاسِ بِالْإِثْمِ وَأَنْتُمْ تَعْلَمُونَ. And do not consume one another's wealth unjustly or send it in bribery to the rulers in order that they might aid you to consume a portion of the wealth of the people sinfully, while you know it is unlawful. In another verse, the Quran says, and what Allah restored to His messenger from the people of the towns, it is for Allah and for the messenger and for his near relatives and orphans and the stranded travelers, so that it will not be a perpetual distribution among the rich from among you. And whatever the messenger has given you, take, and whatever he has forbidden you, refrain from. Or وَلَا تَبْخَسُوا النَّاسَ أَشْيَاءَهُمْ وَلَا تُفْسِدُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ بَعْدَ إِصْلَاحِهَا. And do not deprive people of their due, and do not cause corruption on the earth after its reformation. And he repeats it different way. وَلَا تَبْخَسُوا النَّاسَ أَشْيَاءَهُمْ وَلَا تَعْثُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ مُفْسِدِينَ. And do not deprive people of their due, and do not commit abuse on earth, spreading corruption. If someone thinks these commands do not go beyond advice level, they have not understood the goal of these verses. From the tone, emphasis, and repeating of such verses, these verses have legal and ruling implications upon which, plus relevant Sunnah tradition, scholars have drawn fiqhi rulings. On the next level, as individuals on earth, while we think we own things like property, wealth, even our own bodies, God is the absolute owner, and to him belongs the kingdom of heaven and earth and what's in them. The evidence is abundantly clear. When we leave this world, we take nothing with us. We pass on our wealth, our possessions, we should say, to our children, and they in turn pass on to theirs, and so on. When we leave, we take nothing with us except our actions in this life, and all else remains here in this world, and everything ultimately is returned to our Lord Almighty. There is a conversation between Shu'aib alayhi salam and his people in the Quran, as they ask him, قالوا يا شعيب أصلاتك تأمرك أن نترك ما يعبد آباؤنا أو أن نفعل في أموالنا ما نشاء. They said, "Oh Shu'aib, does your prayer command you that we should leave what our fathers worship, or not to do with our wealth what we please? Is it your prayer that commands us what to do with our wealth? It is our property, and we can do with it what we please. We can treat it as we wish, through things like riba, usury, through bribes, through gambling, etc., etc. We want to follow the way of forefathers, which is honorable for us." This was the logic from disbelievers toward a man, a prophet, who was sent to them as a reformer who opposed two things of theirs. One being the tradition of idolatry, and the other being the way they managed their wealth. He wanted to reform the way they viewed their wealth, and that the ultimate ownership belongs to Allah Azza wa Jal, as one must not misuse it in ways such as gambling, usury, exploitation, or any way that harms oneself and the society. His argument was that our ownership of things is limited. It is not absolute, where I can do whatever I wish with it. He then responds in the next verse, as he says, قَالَ يَا قَوْمِ أَرَأَيْتُمْ إِن كُنْتُ عَلَى بَيِّنَةٍ مِّن رَبِّي وَرَزَقَنِي مِنْهُ رِزْقًا حَسَنًا. He said, "O my people, have you considered if I am upon clear evidence from my Lord, and he has provided me with a good provision from him, and I do not intend to differ from you in what I have forbidden you to do? O my people, I am one of you. Don't you see the clear evidence, the logic I bring you from my Lord, and want nothing but good things for you? My Lord has given me a good, a pure provision. I want the same thing for you. What I'm telling you is not to lead you astray, deceive you, or take advantage of you or your wealth. In spite of all this, are you asking me to abandon my mission? I do not wish to oppose that which I have forbidden you, so that you might say he's not practicing what he preaches. Then says, إن أريد إلا الإصلاح ما استطعت وما توفيقي إلا بالله. Only intend to reform as much as I am able, and my success is not but through Allah. In other words, in opposition to his people, Shu'aib is showing them the path to reform their ways, especially when it comes to worshiping God alone, and subsequently dealing with their wealth, followed by setting himself as an example. So when he forbids stealing, gambling, or usury, he does not do any of it himself. Lead by example, which was the way of all prophets and messengers of God, peace be upon them all. Furthermore, Shu'aib alayhi salam tells them Allah has provided good and ample provision for him. So he does not need anything from his people, and that God had provided him with pure and permitted sustenance. A short passage describing a prophet called Shu'aib and the situation with his people in Surah Hud, chapter 11. Two verses that inspire all those who want to reform their community with a few advice. Number one, when doing something for the sake of God, firstly, do not take money or recompense from anyone. The minute I say this is my right, or you owe me, or remember this, etc., I have forfeited God's reward. One must have a good job or an ample way of pure sustenance, so he does not need others' handouts, while one invites others to his deen. Number two, practice what you preach. Not that taqwa, God consciousness, should be for others but not for me. I do as I wish because I'm the teacher and don't have to practice what I preach. It is to such people that Allah Azza wa Jalla says, لَمَ تَقُولُونَ مَا لَا تَفْعَلُونَ. Why do you say that which you do not do? Number three, your intention must be to reform. That is, to show people what is wrong with what they are doing, or what is the harm of it, and then show the way to fix it. Therefore, anyone who wants to reform a community can take lessons from this short passage in the Quran from the Prophet Shu'aib alayhi salam as to how he dealt with his people. The reality is that it is in these two particular subject matters, that people are continuously tested, and some with hard tests. One, in practicing what one preaches, and the other with one's wealth, which is very important. We often see people who claim to be religious, spiritual, or man of cloth, as they say, yet when it comes to money or wealth, they become so particular, so possessive, so selfish, so profit-driven, showing a behavior equal to those who are not religious or spiritual. That is why the Quran repeatedly says, we will test you through wealth and possessions. So be careful. Some people do strange things. Let's say someone leaves a trust, amana, with you. Whatever it may be, let's say some amount of money to be returned to him in 6 months or a year from now. If you take that money and trade with it in the stock market, for example, for your own benefit, without his permission, it is haram, forbidden. Even though for certain you knew you would have dividend or profit from it. That profit is haram. It is his money as a trust with you to be returned to him. You might say, well, I did not take his money or harm his money. I just made some profit by investing it and then returned the exact amount to him. The answer is you had no right to do such thing without his permission. And of course, you could argue, what if you went bankrupt or lost that money while you were trading it? So you can take it from this simple example upward and keep going higher and higher to those elites within the community who embezzle money, take bribes, riba, and do corruption in various forms. There are many complex issues and problems that come up when dealing with money, wealth, and finance that leave you in continuous state of test and trials. And some people try to justify it through weak arguments. By the way, in parentheses, one of the characteristics of the Messenger of God sallallahu alaihi wasallam was his trustworthiness, for which he was very well known, even before he became a prophet. The Quran also has several explicit verses, such as the one that says, إِنَّ اللَّهَ يَأْمُرُكُمْ أَن تُؤَدُّوا الْأَمَانَاتِ إِلَى أَهْلِهَا. Indeed, Allah commands you to return that which has been entrusted to you to the rightful owners. يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا لَا تَخُونُوا اللَّهَ وَالرَّسُولَ وَلَا تَخُونُوا أَمَانَاتِكُمْ وَأَنْتُمْ تَعْلَمُونَ. O you who believe, do not betray Allah and the Messenger, nor knowingly betray your trusts. The subject of amana, trust, was very important in the past. And while its concept still remains relevant and important, its applications expand or change over time. In the old days, for example, there were no banks, so people left their money or property with someone they trusted for a certain period of time. And such a person was so important to have in the community. But now, with advent of banks and bank accounts, safety deposit boxes, certificate of ownership, etc., those applications have been reduced, but the concept remains, God's ruling remains as it extends to other applications, such as if you are working for someone, for example, whether it is a public or a private company or government office, you have been entrusted with the public property and entrusted to put in full day of work equal to your pay per your hiring contract or agreement. One must not spend his or her time chatting with others or on the phone on personal matters or constant coffee breaks or using public property for one's personal use. One cannot betray Baitul Mal or public treasury, whether it is through wasting time, property, or any agreement within the contract. This is just one form of amana, which you can take and extend to many other forms. Even the Quran is a trust with us because its directives, its commands are limited to this life, as its purpose is guidance in this life. So as long as we exist in this life, this trust must be kept and lived by till end of time. Many people think they are trustworthy, but in reality, they are betraying someone's trust. Another example, one takes a job by recommendation of a friend, an easy job, but draws far more salary than normally expected from such job. Or one is given a job as a favor, but he does not deserve it or cannot fulfill all of its requirements. this is not only betraying a trust, but also an unjust act because someone more qualified could have taken that job. This is why we have a prophetic tradition, hadith, that says if someone has taken a job while knowing someone else is more qualified and can do the job much better and decides not to step aside and let the qualified person take over, he has betrayed Allah, His Messenger, and the Muslims. This is called amana. This is what we mean when we say Islamic rules and its views do not get outdated. Rather, applications of some rulings may change over time and conditions. In conclusion, the concept of individual ownership in Islam is limited and conditional, and because the ultimate ownership and kingdom belongs to Allah Azza wa Jal, He has placed what we have as possessions, as favors and bounty in form of a trust among us to enjoy them for a period of time within the bounds He has placed on us through His instructions in His book. When one thinks this way, that he owns nothing of this life and he just has a temporary custodianship and stewardship of what he possesses, then one would not feel so attached to what he has. Practice benevolence, knowing he takes nothing of this world with him to the next world except his deeds. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.